Israel is facing one of its most serious crises in recent years. Diaspora Jews, or those from the Jewish faith living outside of Israel, are turning away from Israel. There are several reasons for this. The primary one is the assimilation into Israel, and simply put, according to Israel's education minister Naftali Bennett, more and more Jews living abroad just don't care about Israel anymore. Another reason for why Jews outside of Israel are distancing themselves from Tel Aviv is the extreme policies being pushed by the far right-wing regime of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. This includes internal policies such as the mistreatment and violence against Palestinians in the occupied lands of the West Bank and Jerusalem al-Quds, and the besieged Gaza Strip. For years, the regime in Tel Aviv has pleaded to Israelis everywhere to make Israel their primary home, something that many are reluctant to do.
With great pride, I'm a Jew, and this is what makes Israel unique. Because all Jews can feel they belong in Israel, and that Israel belongs to them. So tonight, I call on all of you, and I call on young Jews from the world over, come to Israel, make Aliyah, this is your land, this is your birthright.
This is Tel Aviv, the capital of Israel. It has a population of around 400,000 people, many of whom descendants of European settlers who fled Europe after World War II and settled on Palestinian land. There we spoke to Hannah Brown, a dual Israeli-American citizen who describes herself as a movie critic. She told us in detail her ordeal of coming to Israel.
First came here in 1984. It did bother me that I felt that certain Israelis would just never take me seriously, and a lot of it was because my Hebrew wasn't that great. Now that I speak better Hebrew, it's easier. There are certain Israelis who are never going to accept somebody who was born abroad, I know the Russians feel it, the Ethiopians feel it, and I think the Americans less so because a lot of Israelis speak English, but you just have to live with that some people aren't going to take you seriously. I think these days, locals are kind of just happy that anybody is coming to Israel. So they're, I think they're more accepting than when I first came. In those days, in the 80s, the goal was Aliyah, that Jews from all over the world would move here. And then gradually, it's the goal, I think, of all these government organizations like the Sachnud, and they've just changed. And now it's just that there'll be a big connection with Israel. And that's what all these birthright trips are. When I was finishing college, there was no birthright. If you wanted to come here, you had to buy a ticket. And then these days, I think the idea is to just turn it into a party for these college kids or these young people so that they'll have really positive experiences. But I don't see that there's any goal I don't think anyone takes it seriously that there's going to be a lot of immigration from the United States.
Hannah says that many Jews living abroad are worried to come back because they would probably be arrested upon arrival, as some of them are critical of the policies of the regime in Tel Aviv.
I have some friends who are in America on the left, very interested in Israel, have written articles critical of Israeli policy, and they're concerned that they won't even be able to get into the country now if they try to visit. A number of people who are considered left-wing activists have been stopped at the airport and not even allowed in. And so they're not sure they want to bother trying to get on a plane and coming here. And these are people who visited many times. And they're concerned about it. And I don't know what to tell them. I don't know if they really can get in. And obviously, if people can't even come who want to come, that's a huge problem. It's been a concern that my friends can't come and visit, people who really have a commitment to this country. And I hope that the next time they try to come, they will be able to come, but it does make me feel more isolated that, that my friends, because they've written a couple of articles, may not be able to get in at the airport, that we'll have to, if they come, I'll have to have a lawyer waiting on call for them.
In recent years, the Israeli regime has blamed the Diaspora Jews, or those living outside of Israel, for not assimilating into Israeli society. This is because they have been assimilated into the respective societies they reside in, such as the US, Europe, or elsewhere, and are not interested in residing in Israel. The issue has garnered much media hype in Israel as the regime believes that in the absence of Israeli assimilation, Israel would cease to define itself as the Jewish home. Thus, the issue, according to Tel Aviv, is a national security threat. Here on the streets of Tel Aviv, the Israelis we spoke to seemed divided on the issue of assimilation.
It is a media crisis. I think the media has polarized people, and I think the media is very godless, and that leads to, bad choices by Jewish people, and the media is very powerful. They control television, movies, conversation. It's a bad influence on Jewish people.
So I'm coming from the States and I'm here on holiday. I feel the exact opposite. I don't feel there's an indifference. Actually, my husband and I were just discussing how we feel that we belong here. We should be here. There's no reason we should be back in the States. From everyone that we've seen, from everyone that we spoke to, even the couple days that we've been here, it's been as if we're family.
I think it's not a connection of Israel. I think it's just a connection for them for Judaism. Like if they're going to assimilate, move to America, and and marry a non-Jew, or embrace the non-Jewish culture, I think it's them leaving the faith almost, and their connection with the faith versus the land of Israel. I think everyone's at a different level. So. But I think it's more about their culture and the traditions and their faith more than just the actual land and the political, Israel bond. I think, there are some people that may have left Israel just because, like I said, for political reasons, financial reasons, and don't have that same connection.
Where I live, I don't see that. In America, where there is, because of assimilation, that there is a disconnect. There may be in some areas, but that doesn't mean that a majority or a large number are, but there may be.
Naturally, there's a different language and there's a different culture that occurs in Israel, so there's going to be some disconnect or some differences in culture no matter what happens. This is the Middle East afterwards. It's not living in the West. As much as westernized Israel is, this is still a different neighborhood.
You live in Israel, you struggle with the day-to-day, with all the challenges that we have in Israel. And if you are living outside of Israel, you are not feeling that.
Europeans have more contact with the Israelis. The Europeans are traveling much more to Israel. You don't find so many Jewish Americans which are traveling so often to Israel. And therefore they don't understand. They just read the newspapers. They have no idea what's happening.
Many American Jews feel that the regime in Israel has repeatedly snubbed their views or taken actions that broaden the divide between the Diaspora Jews and Israeli Jews. The rift has grown even more apart. At least 64% of Israeli Jews believe Tel Aviv should not take into any consideration American Jewish leaders' views on peace negotiations with the Palestinians, according to a study by the UJA Federation of New York. Moreover, the study also cited that 89% of Israeli Jews said that Israeli Jews have a stronger sense of belonging to Israel as compared with non-Israeli Jews. Another survey says that 54% of Israelis believe that Diaspora Jews have no right to criticize Israel. As the divisions between Israeli Jews and non-Israeli Jews continue to linger in the divisive policies of Israel, more and more people are distancing themselves from Tel Aviv. This is something that the regime worries will consolidate internal support for Israel, while at the same time fearing losing external Jewish support, something that has kept Israel afloat for over 70 years.